Do you feel that psychedelics have shaped the way you are as a leader, or they've changed the way you perform as a leader?
Yes, absolutely.
Your most mind altering hour of the week. Hi, you're listening to Shift Happens, and I'm your host, Ina.
So, my motivation for inviting Michael Masket to this podcast is simple. Michael, for me, is one of the most captivating people that I have ever met. And his life, his professional path, his personality, for me, represent the dot on the horizon for where humanity, or the human species, is currently headed. Um, for me, he's the new Renaissance man. And let me explain why. Michael started his career in the hub, the global hub for startups and innovation in the Silicon Valley. Then he moved to the global hub for finance, business, and commerce, which is New York City. Finally, making his way to the convergence point for sustainability, for science, for technology, also known as the most liberal city in the world, also known as the city where crazy is a value, which is Amsterdam, which is where I met Michael about 4 years ago. And at that point in his life, he was just starting his exploration into psychedelics. And in that way, for that extra reason, Michael for me represents the type of open-mindedness, the type of unwavering dedication, the type of commitment, but also intelligence and professional prowess that I feel inspires and also describes the people who are listening to this podcast, so the Shift Collective. That's why I'm super excited to have you here, Michael. Thank you for taking time from your adventures and from your travels to join us here today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here, and quite an introduction. Thanks for having me here, and super excited to be chatting with the Shift Collective.
May I ask where you're traveling from?
Yeah, so I'm traveling from, as you mentioned, originally from Silicon Valley. Just spent a couple months back on the West Coast, introducing my family and friends to a relatively new girlfriend, Katerina from Slovakia. And in a few weeks, going to be heading off to Southeast Asia, Nepal, Bhutan, India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Philippines, and Korea to do combination of community exploration, vipassana, so sitting silent for 10 days, Himalaya trek, some Ayurvedic treatment in Rishikesh, and traveling with a little bit of a different intention. Instead of just going to see a lot of things, actually going to experience and see kind of what community means to myself, my girlfriend. And there's a lot of wisdom out there, and really excited to continue expanding horizons. As you mentioned, I'm from Silicon Valley, and that is a very innovative, amazing place, but does not represent the experience of most of the world. And so I really love seeing different ways of life and thinking and being.
Wow, and that's exactly what I mean. I mean, what a bag of wisdom, of adventure, of interests is. Yeah, it's incredible. But before we start, we get into the depth of everything because I want to know everything. I have a question. We have a tradition on the Shit Happens podcast, and that is that a previous guest would leave a question for you, in this case, or for the next guest. And we had Peter Schouten on our podcast, on the previous one, where we spoke about regulation of psychedelics in the Netherlands. So you will figure out that this question comes from a lawyer when I when I ask it. And the question was, do you believe that jail time as a punishment for longer than 2 years is still an effective way to have a corrective measure for the detained? Really your area of expertise, I know.
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I pretend to ever play one. So, I think there's some caveats to the question, right? I think you just blanket the whole world and all criminal systems. I think it's very difficult to give a yay or a nay. I'm not sure that's what he's asking for. I do think in certain situations, right, the risk of not giving somebody maybe their full length, but instead 2 years, probably the risks are less than the benefits. At the same time, and this was a conversation I had over Easter with a friend of mine who was in the U.S. military. He mentioned that there are certain situations or certain outcomes where, unfortunately, it's probably best not to take that risk based upon previous behavior. And for me, again, not being a lawyer or knowing much, 2 years might be a little bit short in some of those situations, and it's really that risk reward. So I don't think it's a yes or no answer. That being said, the prison industrial complex and the way that things work in the US and so forth is clearly not working, right? And I think until we start looking at addicts, we start looking at people who are in prison, all these people as fellow humans that need to be healed. But instead of putting them and dehumanizing them, but actually treating them as in a lot of cases, mentally unstable people that they are, rather than criminals, I think that will change the system. But whether or not 2 years is enough or not, I don't think I'm qualified to answer. But that's kind of, I think, how we need to start thinking about criminals and mental health, because I think they're way more intimately connected than we give credit to. And I'm a big fan of Gabor Mate and what he talks about, and I think it kind of ties into that. So I'd like to look at the recidivism rates and other things to fully answer it. But yeah, that's a doozy of a question.
Thank you for, trying to answer this question. I don't think anybody has an answer to such indeed of a doozy of a question. However, we do have a kind of a precedence that tried to answer this question. And if you remember the Concord experiment that was conducted in the 61 to 63, and it was conducted by a group of scientists from the Harvard University. So their hypothesis was just let's put all these guys together, let's give them some psychedelics, and then they will forget all about their antisocial or bad behavior, and therefore they could be, let out sooner than we wouldn't need long-term detainment. And what do you think the result of that experiment was, or maybe you know about it?
Well, the result, I would guess that the result was less below average recidivism for those behaviors. Would be my guess. Obviously, I'm biased. I think there's a lot of potential in psychedelics and helping mental health. One question I also have is, did the gentleman who was here before who asked that question, did he have an opinion or thoughts about the question he asked? Or, I'd love to hear his thoughts after I've already had a chance to answer.
Peter, I have to invite you back to the podcast. So the results of the Concord experiment were inconclusive. Basically, they didn't find any positive, very, very small positive shifts in behaviors. And they are now the scientists or the science world is looking into repeating the experiment because they felt there were some missed opportunities or things they could have done better. However, for me, this doesn't feel like a failed experiment. I feel that this actually was a successful experiment in proving that psychedelics are not a drug. And I feel that it's time for us to remove these labels, and it's very important, the vocabulary that we use around this kind of topics. Because as soon as we label something as a drug, there are two associations that are coming to our minds, and possibly one that's sitting in your drawer, so something that's chemically produced, and something that you are kind of going to, like a paracetamol, take and then kick back, relax, and it will do the work for you. And the reason I'm against that label is because psychedelics are not working that way, as you know, and I'm curious to hear about your experience in a second. They're not something that you take and then they will do the work for you, but it requires a whole set of skills, of training, of preparation, but also the setting and the way things are taking place in that situation in and of itself. And I'm sure those Harvard University scientists, because they were it's people such as Timothy Leary. I mean, these are not your everyday Joes, right?
Not your average people.
No, they probably have considered certain aspects, but I'm not sure how holistic the whole process was. So, in that sense, for me, this experiment definitely proves that psychedelics are not a drug. It's not something you pop and relax and it takes work and it does its job, but it's something you need to co-create and work with together. So it's a relationship, it's a symbiosis. And that requires a certain set of skills, a certain set of characteristics and preparation. So I'd like to maybe then lead with this into a question for you. Normally we associate psychedelics or the moment we're going to take something with the last resort. Things are not working out, so let me take some ayahuasca. Or things are not working out, let me take some psilocybin. And to me, you look like a very well-rounded person where things are very much working out in all ways and in all directions. So I'm curious, what made you start to explore psychedelics to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a saying, fake it till you make it. And I do think, and I think Roland Griffiths has done studies on psychedelic use for healthy people, right? So we always look at it in terms of people that have challenges. And hey, let's call a spade a spade. Everybody has challenges in their life, and they all are very personal and intimate and of varying degrees of severity in terms of how much they affect your day to day. Some can hardly get out of bed, and some, you want to optimize. For me, what I've found through psychedelics in not a recreational sense, but in a therapeutic sense, because I recreationally was playing around with them and utilizing them since basically college, and then starting with our session, really looking at it more as a opening and kind of another modality, as well as with meditation and mindfulness and breath work and cold exposure and all these different pieces kind of add to the tool chest of ways to explore. And for me, I had a calling after a really kind of hectic, crazy 2020, which interestingly, I know is crazy for a lot of people, right? And a lot of times, unfortunately, crazy, sad and bad and intense because of lost ones and being locked up and all the mental health issues that I think were always underneath kind of bubbling up. Interestingly, for me, it was a pretty transformative year where I started off by getting divorced, starting a new relationship, working at Zoom, which I'd been working at, buying a home. And so I came to my first experience really in a place of there's a lot going on. Also helping my parents finalize their divorce. And so a lot of positive and a lot of challenges and changes, and really wanted to come in with the intention of like, what's lacking or what am I not able to find, and where is kind of some self-love missing, which again, part of it felt a little awkward at 2020 to be doing that kind of work when the world's on fire and so many other things are being challenged. But yeah, I came into it really with this appreciation of what they've provided recreationally and thinking, hey, I'm learning about this space, I'm learning about different modalities and all these healing non-prescriptive modalities I find can be really helpful at different times. And right now, the one that's kind of calling me the most is a Vipassana, which I'm doing next month, where I'm going to sit silently, hopefully for 10 days and explore what that experience is. And I almost grouped them together. And what you had said about psychedelics and drugs and how we look at these things, I think need to be reframed, because, hey, the tobacco and the alcohol that the governments are saying are legal drugs are still drugs, and quite frankly, much more toxic and unhealthy. Yet because a body of sometimes uninformed or less informed than they should be based upon legislation and previous social norms based on like the last couple hundred years, not social norms over our 5,000 to 10,000 years existence. People think of drugs bad, but really, psychedelics I think should be categorized differently, and the destigmatization or kind of branding them differently is a challenge. But I think it begins just through conversation and understanding, and not having fear. Fear is such a powerful component of it, which governments have been able to exploit And I think they were doing what they thought was right. I don't think it was evil. I think it was just uninformed.
Absolutely. And there are so many tangents that I want to plug into. One starting with you mentioned several instances or stakeholder groups related to the psychedelic arena. And I was wondering, because you stated that your former employer, Zoom, corporate world, where do they sit in this whole story, according to you?
It's interesting because I think throughout the 4 years, especially working in the Netherlands, there's definitely a culture of slightly more tolerance or acceptance, but there's also what we call the, I don't know if people like it or not, but the psychedelic renaissance. And so the idea of people talking about going to an ayahuasca retreat or a psilocybin retreat, specifically in the Netherlands, because it's legal, I saw it kind of being something people didn't really talk about maybe when I started in 2019, is, hey, whatever helps with mental health, right, is a matter of they would support it, I would assume. I think one thing that Silicon Valley is kind of finding again is the fact that a lot of, like, you think of Steve Jobs and these other kind of visionaries, Silicon Valley, where I'm from originally, and where my mom grew up when it was just like kind of farmland before all the companies came in, there was a lot of energy there that had to do with the 60s and psychedelics and changing the world and kind of what technology allows. And technology is a representation of us and a kind of our imagination, and there's really no limit to it other than what is based on physics, which is what we know. But a lot of that came from Silicon Valley. So I think it would be a little hypocritical for companies based in and kind of in the tech world to not be open to using this type of technology, which is what I think psychedelics are for the mind, to help solve mental health issues.
I love that you call it technology. I refer to it as well, also as a technology. Speaking of which, I mean, steering the business development and sales for some of the largest corporations in the world, and Zoom being one of the latest gem on your resume. And let's face it, being at the front end of the business growth of the company, which shapes actually fundamentally the way we connect with each other in this digital world, is not a small feat. This is quite an impressive achievement. For me, that requires a specific type of leadership, requires a different type of leadership. Somehow I see psychedelics providing that type of thinking and skills that would, like, maybe we could think about meta-awareness or the type of empathy that is required or the type of open-mindedness that would be required. Do you feel that psychedelics have shaped the way you are as a leader, or they've changed the way you perform as a leader?
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, absolutely. I think a combination of psychedelics, meditation, breath work, all these different modalities provide insights into kind of your own psyche and process. And through that, you realize that, everybody's going through theirs at different levels. And so there's almost more of an appreciation. It's a combination of, I think, also experience and age and kind of, the leader I was at 25, 26 is very different than the one at 33, 34. And so that's also a factor. But I do think it just, provides, especially in situations where, Zoom was super impactful and still is to the world. But my job leading the business development organization, which was really helping kind of get into the door and beginning the process for companies to look at Zoom more. Hey, let's just call space aid. Like, we're not solving cancer and people aren't living or dying by it. And so I think it allows you that separation of, this is my identity that is tied to validation that I'm seeking, that I'm working on with my therapist and other people or individuals, my partner. And so I think it just gives you that space of realizing where you fit in and accepting it, or if you don't fully feel into it, realizing, hey, maybe there's something else. And so I think it downplays, or what I think we see a lot is people get very attached to their identity. And sometimes it is very meaningful, impactful, purposeful work. But at the end of the day, we're moving software around, right? And as long as people can connect, if that's the end goal, there's a million reasons why I think Zoom is the best. But there's also, for me, it was much more about the people part of it. And so I really enjoyed working with people early on in their career. And I got a lot of purpose and drive and energy from that. And when you work with people, especially very early on in their career, there's a lot of excitement. And so how do you temper or help drive that excitement? So yeah, I would say psychedelics and again, meditation and all these different modalities allow you to be kind of a spectator to your thoughts. And every time you learn how to do more and more of that, I think you have less knee-jerk responses to others because you're kind of more calculated yourself. But the minute you start thinking that and you start getting ahead of yourself, the universe will humble you and show you that you still have a lot more to learn yourself. So it's always a back and forth.
Yeah, there are already quite some experiments also in Silicon Valley, which you mentioned earlier, but as well as in Amsterdam, where we have, I mean, people usually think that everything is legal here, which is not true. And only magic mushrooms are sold legally in smart shops. And nothing else, actually, from the psychedelic range is currently allowed to be sold. And yet we already have companies who are utilizing, well, the legal substances for microdosing team building events. And there are some underground stories, I don't know how true they are, for example, with Tommy Hilfiger, that they've done team building events using microdoses. And I find that a fascinating topic. And I'm wondering, would you have dared, after having had your experience with a small dose, to bring your team for a session with us, for example?
You know, I definitely have thought about the potential for leaders to come in. And again, you know, the world we live in, obviously this needs to be legal and approved and waivers and all that stuff, which, you know, I would never dare to do with in a publicly traded company without getting those kind of T's and dots, T's crossed and I's dotted. But I think there's a great potential. Would I have dared to do it? You know, I really loved my job and enjoyed the team I worked with. And so there are limitations when you're not working in a startup that can not do whatever it wants, but have a lot more leniency. But I definitely would think it could be valuable. I think what I'd more is kind of in between was I would have honest discussions with team members about my experiences with legal substances here and what kind of point them in the right direction for their own exploration. Just because, unfortunately, we're in a place now where everybody can feel comfortable or pressured, and I don't really want to be. I don't want to combine kind of the corporate with the psyche in that way. But I do think it'd be really valuable if like 5-10 leaders, senior leaders, decided they wanted to, and everybody would bought in, and the right process would. I think that could be really helpful as you think kind of change from the leaders, and then they can disseminate their lessons or learnings and just kind of create a culture of openness. But no, the short answer, I don't know if I would dare at a big corporate company to propose that yet. But if somebody else did and it was approved, I would absolutely support it and do it in a way that was ethical and comfortable, and allow people also the ability to say no thank you, because these are, as you know, these are pretty serious brain technologies or soul line technologies that you want to be respectful.
Absolutely agree with the responsible aspect of it. But separating the corporate from the psyche, I would challenge you there. I mean, if you're looking on the work floor and you're seeing all the numbers of burnout and McKinsey and all other companies that I've heard struggling with the numbers of, people going on long-term sick leave, how much that costs us as an economy, and how simple the solution could be, because it's sitting really, it's been proven that it's helping with all this mental issues. And therefore, I think we would be remiss not to explore that because of the stigma. And the reason I asked you this question is because for me, you're one of the most open-minded leaders that I know. And having explored all these things by yourself, for yourself, and that kind of shows that if you are still trepidant, so you're still careful about how are we going to bring, or whether we're going to bring this into the work floor, I can imagine that the rest of the world is way miles behind, right? So that kind of shows where we are as a society. Even if the forward thinkers are still also careful, well, we have a long way to go. And that's a bit unfortunate, because the mental crisis is is now something everybody knows about. 1 in 7 people have some kind of a mental issue.
Yeah, I agree. It is unfortunate. I think if it was in a smaller company, right, there are just the red tape that you see in big corporations. I know you've probably seen as well. I think I would want it to be done in a way, yeah, like kind of like CYA a little bit, like cover your ass, right? And I know that's probably not like the most heroic and so forth, but you also can't impart change if you get fired and you're gone, right? And so it'd be something that I would advocate for in the right programming, right? So work with the human resources, work with the right people to present it. But I fear that like just suggesting it and kind of being rogue within, hey, when you sign up in a big company, there are responsibilities, rules, you decide the benefits of that big company. The downside are you probably don't get to always be your full authentic self, which might be a reason why I'm not sure if I'm going to do that again in my career. But yeah, it is unfortunate as you kind of say that's the answer. But I do think there's a lot of innovation comes not just like the hardware and software from Silicon Valley. I hope also that like the norms you hear about microdosing and those types of things of executives. Hopefully that starts to kind of trickle down. But yeah, I just wanted to add a little.
Yeah, makes sense. And indeed, it is the smaller companies that are currently exploring this and are interested. But I was very happy to hear about Tommy Hilfiger. That kind of sets a bit the pace a little bit as well. Don't know about that experiment. So if anybody listening to this has heard it before and you have an idea about how it went, perhaps you participated in it, I would love to hear more about it. When we had a session together, which was about 4 years ago, and it was the onset of COVID at that moment in time, I think.
Yeah, December 2020.
December 2020. And I remember that you were pretty happy with your work. However, after the session, you started to have certain new ideas or you were influenced in a certain direction. And I'm wondering how much has that impacted where you are today? Has it done anything to the way you look at or the way the paths that you took in the following months?
Yeah, in preparation for today, I was thinking about the experience and the journal that I had written in, which I think was like a 7 or 8 page entry. And one thing that I remember pretty vividly is thinking about some of the personal challenges I was having in the midst of kind of mediating my parents' divorce, as well as just the stress of like working a lot and everything. Something that really came up was kind of it all doesn't matter, right? Not in a kind of like not loser is a bad word, but kind of like, oh, who just cares? It was more kind of like all these things, if you're doing it from an authentic, real place, like it doesn't matter, right? Mm-hmm. What happens, the outcomes matter, but not as much as the inputs. And so, yeah, I definitely think that experience and just really feeling like at one moment, all of, consciousness and humanity and like everything had been built up for this crescendo that was just so fabulous. And I felt so safe and could surrender to that, typically in a pretty controlled environment where I have a lot of the factors in control, being able to like learn how to surrender and trust the process. I say that a lot to my teams is, hey, keep putting in the inputs over time and just trust the process. And I think through different experiences since then, right, kind of reaffirming things that I've thought about, right, in terms of my own journey, as well as the rest that my body needs, right, kind of some of the lessons I've gotten earlier this year, or other things that I rationally thought about, but then until you really embody and feel them, which I think different psychedelics or mindfulness practices can help cross that chasm. I mean, we're so much in our like top of our body and our brain. What does the body actually feel? And I'm still very much so at the very beginning of that journey. But I do believe the first therapeutic psychedelic journey opened that up in terms of, I think it's one of those gifts that keeps giving, right? And clearly if the first time doesn't occur that way, or let's say it's not as authentic, or you kind of don't feel comfortable, it could really limit, right? Like I think psychedelics can open up a lot, but they can also close things if you aren't ready for it, or it's not provided in the right setting and venue. You can actually be turned away from it. And so, there's no question that from that experience, there's been rehashing of that thought process, and just continues opening me up to more and more experiences and being willing to question and explore and just be a spectator to your thoughts and really see like, hey, is this me or is this what I think other people want or what I think I want rather than what my body and what I really feel. So.
And your exploration was not limited to psilocybin, the session that we had, and you mentioned it yourself, that it was just the opening or the gateway to further exploration. What kind of other psychedelics have you tried, and what's the difference? Did you notice any differences? And yeah, can you share anything about that?
So what other psychedelics? So in a controlled setting earlier this year, tried ayahuasca for the first time, which I've also been calling that I had, and just started dating my girlfriend who had her own experiences and really kind of came into my life right at that moment to help me be very open to it. And as I think I just mentioned, the lesson that I really learned was just how exhausted I am, because it basically put me to sleep. And I think these experiences, I also had a similar experience with Stanislav Grof breathwork before the MAPS Psychedelic Science Conference in Denver this year, where through the holotropic breathwork also fell asleep, right? So it's kind of these recurring themes of exhaustion that I think I knew, but there's still a lot of energy that I was kind of giving to other people and now trying to focus a little bit more on giving myself that energy and kind of sort of storing it up. And then there was also one other psilocybin journey that I've had in a therapeutic setting, which was not nearly as intense as ours in terms of, I think duration, visualizations, all of those pieces. But a theme that really came was like desiring and wanting a partner in crime, and thinking of some of the like male or female friends that I had, specifically some of the male friends that I had, kind of wanting that in an intimate female loving relationship. And so that theme came, and then within like less than a month from that, I re-met my now girlfriend. So kind of gives me goosebumps just like thinking about how those all tie together. But I think what all of these experiences and journeys allow you to do is just continue to be open to exploring. And, in today's world, and this might have something to do with the question I'll leave the next guest, but I think in this world we so not divided, but ready to be angry or ready to be this or that. And just like taking a step back and realizing that these are all thoughts that aren't necessarily us. Like there's no better tool in such a short period of time that I think provides that questioning of what our thoughts are than these different psychedelics. And then the last one that's been pretty impactful over the last year is ketamine. I don't know if that's actually considered a psychedelic. There's some debate, but being able to really distance yourself kind of from the experience and have more acceptance towards it. And I've had other individuals in my life share that experience around when they're going through really difficult times, is being able to look at a scene that's extremely painful and can cause depression or cause really significant pain and kind of trauma. And when in ketamine, realizing that that's actually not me, and there's a distance. And so I've experienced that. I've had family members and basically friends that I love and really are close to me share that similar experience. And so I think there's a lot of potential there. And, it luckily in the US, or unlucky, but luckily it's legal. And so there are a lot of help for kind of immediate mental issues around depression and so forth. And so I can definitely see how that is. But some of the visions and things I've seen just over the last 12 months kind of really started to put things into place, and everything just seems to, I want to say kind of like makes sense, right? Even when you're communicating a little bit, when again, this has been done more recreationally, I've wanted to try it really like in a therapeutic legal setting. You kind of finish each other's sentences because you're picking up on things that are not just spoken, but context of conversation and other things. And things just seem to make sense on ketamine. So that's been probably the newest psychedelic that I've been exposed to over the last year or two. That's been pretty profound and inspiring. And since it's legal and acts pretty quickly, I'm hoping that it can help a lot of people quickly, because again, with the mental health crisis and issues we have, quick solutions I think are important to solve right now, and then also looking to
a couple of things that are very interesting to explore here. So first of all, I have goosebumps when you're sharing your story about having seeing your new girlfriend and then her popping up into your life immediately after the session. So this mythopoetical or mythical element of psychedelics, that's super intriguing for me. And I've had multiple clients having a session, seeing someone who they are supposedly supposed to be with, and then receiving a message after months of silence out of the blue immediately during the session or just after. There is just some element that we have to also accept that we will never be able to explain with science. Many things are explainable, many things are translatable to zeros and ones, but not everything. And this is the beauty of psychedelics. This is the element that really intrigues me. Well, what is it that creates this kind of experiences? I love that story, and can resonate with it myself as well. Also, I'm not sure what I feel about ketamine personally. I feel it's like a little bit disassociative, even though I haven't tried it. It's from the experiences that I hear. And then whilst we are all on the quest of integration and becoming more whole, going into the K-hole and disassociating, that aspect for me is a little bit of a and the chemical component of it, that's also something I'm still reluctant about. But yes, I know that it's being used for in controlled environments for solving various mental issues. So obviously it has therapeutic value. And then the third thing you mentioned was Denver. Cool. One of the biggest, well, actually in history, right?
Yeah,
One of the biggest psychedelic conferences in history.
Yeah.
What were the highlights?
So certainly a highlight, right, was getting the experience of just having Stanislav Grof walking around with about 400 people. Half were sitting, half were doing the holotropic breath work, and I think he's around 91, 92. So he wasn't facilitating, but we had some recordings of his, and just kind of thinking about his career and life's work was just super inspiring to like have him at one point like looking at you, even though my eyes are closed, just like, wow, that's such a legend in the field to be that close to somebody who has explored the psyche so much and gone into that world. Was definitely a highlight. Also interesting was the sitting part, just how impactful that was. Watching somebody else and kind of holding space for a female that I had just met the day before, and really kind of getting to this intimate space of holding it for her and helping her through. And you think it's just sitting there, but it's actually, sometimes people say it can be just as intense to sit with somebody as it is to actually experience yourself. So that was certainly a highlight. I think another highlight would be just the cross-section of psychedelics and how they solve, or not solve, but are part of the discussion for multiple things, right? You think about veterans, you think about for healthy people, you think about for firefighters, policemen, like all the different layers, indigenous communities, and kind of where their rights and how that fits in. And by no means do I have opinions or am I an expert in the field, but I just left the conference feeling like, wow, if this net zero trauma by 2070, which I think is what Rick Doblin talked about, if that were achievable, like what would that look like? And again, there's a bias there because it's a psychedelic conference and everybody there believes psychedelics play a huge part in that, and I am a believer as well. But just kind of the cross section of different societal issues and how psychedelics can be one of the pieces to touch it. It's not the only one. It's not taking a pill. It's a completely different model of therapy than just taking a pill and hoping everything works out. It's like, no, you got to eat well. You got to exercise. You got to do other things. It's not just have one psilocybin journey and all of a sudden you're, the next day you're going to wake up perfect. So those would be some of the main highlights, I would say, of the whole experience. And just for me personally, it was 3 days of going to school, but I could listen to 5 different people every hour. And it was like, how do you pick? And just 8 to 6, like having that excitement is something I'm looking for. I'm traveling now, but really looking to engage myself fully with something that I'm really purpose that I really can get behind the purpose and really like use all of my resources for something bigger than myself and something like that. In those 3 days, it was like, wow, this is like going to school for everything you want to learn about, which I think was really cool. And it felt like everybody there had that similar experience. So still a long way to go, still a lot of work to do, and there's lots of ways we could mess it up, right? And so I think people need to also take a step back and be a spectator to the situation and realize this is one part of a very big challenge of how do we, fix societies and indigenous peoples and their rights and mental health and first responders and veterans, like all these different groups that can like come together on a bipartisan issue is so rare in America right now that that's inspiration for hope, which I think a lot of people are looking for. So those would be some of my my pieces. I mentioned the psyche, and I want to just quickly go back for one moment to the kind of your comment, which I think really was important around me not willing to like share it. And I think the psyche and corporate certainly works together. My fear is if you go too far out of your role within a corporate environment, you can potentially do more harm than not. And so I think it's a matter of inspiring and advocating for the people who can help employees' psyche, who want that help. But similar to psychedelics, if you are too much outside of the structures that are built for better or for worse for reasons that we might not always understand, you run the risk of causing more risk than more harm than good. And
What harm would that be?
that people feel as though they have to engage, right? Kind of like, hey, everybody's doing it, especially in a country like Netherlands. Hey, everyone's microdosing. We have
pressure.
to. Pressure. And these are things, even with microdosing, and there's still a lot of science that needs to be done as to whether it works. And placebo is a real thing. Like your mind can do so much more than I think we are aware of. I just was watching something with Joe Dispenza the other day about your thoughts and his piece on that. So my fear would be pushing somebody out of their comfort zone in something that could be life-changing because they're forced to because of a job. And even like if your boss says, hey, here's something we're doing, a lot of people do things because they want to be being your boss, or your boss's boss is behind it. Well, I'm going to be behind it too, when maybe within them they're really like 5 years out. And so the fear would be pushing people too quickly. And similar like our first experience, right? If that didn't go the way it did, maybe I wouldn't have been as open to these modalities as a therapeutic. And I was like, you know what? It was fun. And I remember part of my experience was, hey, this is what I used to do is fun. Like, how do I work through? There's a reason I'm here, not just to like sit back and listen to great music and have a psychedelic experience. And I believe you might rob certain people who are probably the furthest away from saying yes if you force it on them in a corporate environment.
Good point. I can see what you mean with the peer pressure and feeling like, oh, team building event, people are doing it, I must do it as well. And that certainly should never happen. Yeah. And that also is highlighted by the aspect that I believe that thinking that you take psychedelics and suddenly all your problems are going to be erased, all your behavioral issues are going to be transformed, all your ancestral wounds are going to be healed, or all your childhood problems are going to be finally eliminated. That's like imagining that you're taking a spacecraft and you're about to go to Mars, stepping into the spacecraft, sitting into the pilot chair and doing nothing else, right? And waiting for the spacecraft to just kind of take you there and navigate you, and you being able to, by nature, breathe and withstand the different pressure in a cabin and all of that stuff that happens there. For me, that's a similar experience. So it's a paradigm shift, whether we're talking about microdosing or we're talking about a full dose. In both cases, we're talking about not a drug. We're talking about a holistic approach. And as you mentioned, you come as a full person with the full spectrum of tools and technologies that you bring into such a session. You were busy with therapy. You mentioned several other activities like meditation, breath work, yoga, mindfulness, all of those practices. That's what made for a good trip, for an ability for you to create a relationship or a symbiotic co-creative experience with this plant medicine. not the fact that you took the plant medicine. So it is you who creates the situation, and it is you who ensures if it's a good trip or not, or if it's a good experience or not. And for sure, you're mentioning something like a first experience can be a breakthrough in a positive sense, but it can also be a breakthrough in a very negative way. Yeah, and then what then? How do you manage the whole? It could be even an onset of psychosis that takes place, and I've certainly experienced this in the sessions that I've had, and very challenging because people can come very confident about, well, I know what I'm doing here, and yes, I've done therapy, and yes, I'm very aware of myself and my thoughts, and I'm ready to work through certain challenges, issues, wounds, and yet within 2 minutes of feeling the onset of the substance, of the power, what it can do to you, screaming that they want to be taken out. And good luck with
Yeah.
good luck with trying to get them out. Of course, there are ways. Obviously, there are trip stoppers. There's ways to stop something like that, but that doesn't mean that the process for that person is going to stop.
Right.
It is like the
Cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, the cat's out of the bag. So whether you're here, whether you stop the trip, cat's coming with you. Now, what do you do then? So yeah, indeed, if you don't have the tools, if you don't have the holistic support system around yourself, don't begin with anything of that kind. What I really liked about you as a person also at that time is, and I'm wondering if you're applying that wisdom, is you're the first man that I met who said, if I fall in love again, and if I meet a new person with whom I fall in love, I will immediately ask her after the second or third date to go into therapy, relationship therapy together. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yeah. I think it was on our walk afterwards. And yeah, for me, that was something that was kind of foundational. And luckily, I'm doing that now with my beautiful girlfriend and working with her embodiment coach, really. So kind of that's a whole nother world as well, like taking the signals from your body and translating that into how you actually are feeling rather than just your head. So it's kind of embodiment plus couples therapy. But I think the main crux was that I wanted to be with a partner and somebody who wanted to do the work individually and together and kind of heal together. And yeah, I'm super grateful that I found that person, or that person found me, or however it all worked out in the cosmos. But for me, that's just so foundational because what I've seen is people want to start the work once the house is on fire, right? And that is, I think, a recipe for really a lot of work, a lot of extra work, super challenging. And maybe I'm a pessimist, but by the time it gets to by the time the house is on fire, like you just need to run out of the house, right? And hope a firefighter comes to like salvage some of your things, but it's on fire. And I really am in a mindset, and my girlfriend is as well, of building a really strong foundation, right, around that we can build on. Now, that doesn't make it any easier, quite frankly, than starting once it's on fire. It just allows you, I think, a deeper layer. And I think with psychedelics or even the breath work or kind of a couple of my experiences this year, it only allows you to go as deep as you're connected and willing to go with yourself. So the body has this way of kind of like protecting itself. But when you're working on that really strong foundation, I think it goes deeper and deeper, which also can be a pain in the ass and just super hard and difficult. And you're like, God, I thought I figured that out, and then just uncovers deeper layers. But I'd say I'm trying not to be too boastful, but like I'm really proud of myself and us that we've done that. And people are like, well, what's wrong? It's only 2 months in. It's like nothing. Like we're alive. Like I go to therapy as well. And again, I know it's a privilege and there's finances and energy and other things, but it's a privilege to be able to work on yourself. And it's like, hey, I'm alive, and there are days I feel great, there are days I don't feel great, and things are going in alive in me. I want to figure out what that comes from. Not, oh my God, like I can't get out of bed now and I need to start doing it. I think like reshaping that mentality is kind of part of what you're talking about as well with the pharmaceuticals of, hey, I just want a pill to help me. It's like, no, you need to be doing all the other work. Like if you just take the pill and you don't do the other foundations of health and exercise and sleep and all the other different pieces, the pill is not going to help. And so like how do we reframe that as a society, that it actually takes a lot of work, and what we look at as success is a lot of work by that individual, but also hundreds of people who failed trying to be that individual. And we're still successful in other ways, but I think there's like a culture of more transparency and openness. And my experience in the U.S. the last couple of months is a lot of people, I think, have like this front of, hey, success and bigger houses and this or that, and seeing it through my girlfriend who's from Slovakia, post-communist country. It's kind of like, what is all this excess, right? Why? What are you trying to prove and hide? And it's interesting. And a lot of the connections now that I have, it's like we get into the depth pretty quickly because that's what's interesting, exciting. Like the weather or how big your house is or what kind of, like those things are kind of boring. And I think psychedelics is part of that journey as well, right? Of like diving in deeper and just keep going deeper without a solution in mind, right? I just was talking to my therapist the other day. It's like, this isn't a goal to be finished. There are certain areas that we're working on, but this is a lifelong journey that just keeps going deeper and deeper. And so, there's moments, and I think every time we get to see each other, it's kind of a moment of reflection. And so I'm glad you brought that back up. And just really grateful that I wanted to do it. It's funny, when my girlfriend mentioned that to my sisters or a pseudo brother of mine, they were like, Michael suggested that, like they didn't even know that about me. But I'm really proud of us that we did that. And I recommend it to everybody because it's just something about seeing your partner in therapy together, right? There's just some magic in that triangle. And we haven't done psychedelics in that sense. I'm sure that's something we'll explore when we have the calling. But there's just something super powerful of that, like triangle. Therapist, you listening not only to the therapist, but also listening to your partner, talk to the therapist, and you be a spectator. There's some magic there that has been really profound for us. And I'm looking forward to our next session in a few days.
Yeah, so the quality of our relationships defines the quality of our lives. I think it was Esther Perel who said that. Maybe I just invented it. That would be really cool. But I agree. So why not invest in the quality of that, right? When you're buying a new house, you're also going to start pouring down floors, painting the walls. You're not going to wait for 2 years or 3 years when the walls are moldy or the floor is covered in water because you've been walking around on an uncovered cement or whatever to start to fix it up by then. So I love that analogy. I love that approach to it, and I wish everybody else would do it. And it's something I've been trying to convince my partner to do since the beginning of the relationship. And unfortunately, he's been on the side of the spectrum of people who said, oh, if it's not broken, why fix it? And now we see the reason I was asking for that. So now, luckily, we have picked up certain elements of therapeutic relationship therapy. So that's and that we see the results really immediately. It's brilliant how beautiful it works. So I can totally understand the triangulation that you're describing and how that creates an extra dimension to the relationship, and also that creates the solid foundation that you want. So I'm rooting for you guys, and I'm like so curious to speak to you in 10 years and see how this relationship is going, especially looking at how terrible the divorce rates are currently, right? I mean, it's predicted that within 10 years, I don't know how many, more than 60% of the couples are going to divorce. And there are various societal and geopolitical reasons for that, and economical reasons, psychological reasons. But I actually believe that at the core of the whole thing is exactly this missing link that we're not investing in developing the foundation. So I love that, and let me know how that goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
With respect to the different modalities that you're employing to improve your life and to become the person that you are, many people find their go-to thing, their go-to modality, and then they're applying it once or twice. And there is a question that I keep hearing back, and that is, well, if psychedelics are working, or if Vipassana is working, or if mindfulness is working, why do you have to repeat doing it, right? Why do you have to keep going again and again to another ayahuasca session or to another psilocybin session? And of course, I have my answer for that, but that's a question for you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think just the fact that people are asking the question, right, means that they're kind of, people are missing the plot a little bit, right? Where Yeah, as I think I mentioned just briefly before, the deeper layers you go, like the layers you go deeper and deeper is basically how much your body and mind are allowing you to go. And so there's always more depth to do. And so, that you can like isolate a challenge or a problem and solve it, which is very Western medicine, right? Hey, there's something wrong with your shoulder. We're going to isolate it. We're going to look at it, fix it. But we're not going to talk about the whole system, right? And so what I would answer to that question is kind of, hey, like look at your life. Is everything perfectly happy how you would want, and are there areas you want to improve? And if somebody tells you, hey, everything's perfect, it's like, okay, great. Like then maybe that's like as deep as your body is allowing you to go, and you created those defenses for that. And uh, again, maybe that's not the perfect person to like evangelize this, but I think people need to look at it differently in terms of can be from either solving certain challenges or optimizing. And even let's say everything's really good and you're happy, optimizing for better. Like how can you have more purpose? How can you deepen your relationships with others, with yourself, with your communities? And then when you start that process, you're going to uncover more and more. And one thing when you were asking the question or talking, I think psychedelics, of all the different modalities, since it's really just like, hey, half hour, you're shot out, right? Sometimes shorter acting like the ketamine. By being just shot out so quickly, right? And then having that experience within that 4 to 8, one to, let's say, 12-hour experience, depending on the substance. It's a pretty intense short period. That process and experience is just much more instant than, let's say, a meditation or doing breath work over time, which takes kind of consistency built over time. But I think it aids in those other processes in the fact that it shows you what can happen in a short period. But you can't like take psychedelics every day. I mean, I guess you could if you wanted to, but then I think there are some theories probably around the time of the Concorde where they were playing around with that. But it just reinforces those other, let's say, more not sustainable, but more lifestyle sustainable practices like meditation or mindfulness or the cold exposure. Or, quite frankly, what came to mind when you were talking about it was the opening, and kind of psychedelics provide the opening to be open to all these different modalities. And once you found what works, like do it. And what I found myself sometimes doing is almost too much, right? Overload information, right? Like how many Huberman podcasts can you listen to? You got to control it, right? Like what do I want? Okay, I want to get light exposure. I want to get this. I want to get my athletic greens, all these things. But then get all of those and then try it out for 2 to 3 months and then iterate. Whereas if the goal is to just be done, well, that's like, where you're not done until you're, my mind, 6 feet under, or however you decide to be put. And so it's a matter of like being open to those different modalities and being very honest with yourself. Are they serving you or not? And I think psychedelics are just a great way to almost, the neurochemistry of your brain, right, expands, connects those neurons that otherwise, as you get older, which is why we typically get more conservative, they leave. And I think that constant curiosity and being open, because hey, meditation, vipassana might be great right now, but in 5 years, I'd be remiss to say, yeah, I know with certainty that those practices are going to help me, but I know that I'm going to be open to different modalities, and whether or not I ever do psychedelics again, the experience I've had keep me open to that just by seeing whatever the different dimensions, the different worlds out there. So I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think it's a matter of, hey, this journey never ends. And if you're going into these practices hoping that it ends, then I would just really, really encourage you to either A, not start because it's just the wrong foot to step on, or explore why you want to end. And I think we're so Western, and my parents are a doctor and nurse, so I've gotten like Western medicine. This is the way things are. Since I was a young child, and hey, there's a lot of benefits, and if you get hit by a car, you absolutely want Western medicine, right? But there's also Eastern that I think has a lot of potential. And so explore, like, why do you want to check a box, right? Now, my girlfriend listens to this and she hears me talk about checking boxes. She's going to laugh because that's somehow how I behave as well. But why are you trying to check a box rather than experience all the boxes?
Yeah, I feel it's a matter of preference, right? I mean, there are people who are walking through this life just similar to the way you're approaching food, and they like to sample little things from a buffet versus people who are going for, the 7-course meal at the Michelin restaurant, and they want this depth of experience and the intimacy with that experience. And I cannot agree with you more that if you're thinking, oh, let me just do this once and then I'm done, then it's not, but rather don't bother. Yeah. It's like saying, I'm going to go to a yoga class and I'm going to become lean and I'm going to become flexible and I'm going to do all those bridges and saltos, whatever, at the end of just one session or at the end of just one lesson. You're going back and back every 2 times a week at the very least. So in a way, we could look at a psychedelic experience or any kind of other modality that we're applying for, sustaining well-being, but also for getting to know ourselves deeper. For me, it's a journey of self-love, because going deeper, people could ask, well, why? Why do you want to go so deep? And I say, how much do you want to love yourself? How deep is your love? Because I want to know more and more of myself. The more I get to know myself, the more I get under the layers that I thought was scary and shadowy, and the more I think, whoa, but this is a really fun girl there. I love to play with her. And then the more I get to know her, the more I want to know. And that's similar to the process of falling in love, right? The more you know that person, the more you want of her. The one, and I'm speaking from your perspective now, or for me as a man, the more you want of him. And you cannot get enough. So you could look at it as there's depth and layers to your psyche, and a lot of hard work and discipline and commitment is required, as is with any other modality, like if we're talking about Aikido or Taekwondo, or which are also very taxing type of modalities of personal development for me. They're not martial arts just for the sake of fighting. For me, this is more of a philosophy for life. You're also going to apply it systematically. You're also going to apply discipline to it and show up again and again and again. That's the same. Psychedelics are also a martial art, in a sense. And then, which belt do you want? Do you want a belt to begin with, or are you just coming to sample? So it of course depends on the person, depends on the personality. And then that also is an answer in and of itself with respect to if you're still struggling with certain challenges. That's probably why, because you have this sampling personality and you're not eager or curious or committed to go deep enough with yourself, to fall in love deep enough with yourself. Back to Denver, and I think maybe this is the last question. The last time we spoke, you were the one who opened me up to investing in companies or startups which are working with psychedelics. Are you still doing that?
It's a good question. So, first off, I'm not an investor, I've invested in companies, but I'm not a financial expert. And just as a disclaimer to make sure, because we probably made some good decisions, made some poor decisions, and got really fortunate working at Zoom and was able to explore these fields. Currently, I'm not investing anymore in them. I still have my investments there. It's a really interesting space. I think there's a lot of potential. Like a lot of people who probably invested in the 2020 or 2021. We're hoping for a turnaround sometime. These are also things that I was not a lot of my investments, I'm not trying to make a quick buck, right? Like these are things that I believe in for a future that maybe it never goes back, but I'm not playing the market because I don't know enough. And I quite frankly, it's not something that really interests me. What I do think is interesting, I think you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, was there are some companies that are actually trying to get away from the psychedelic experience, right? Which is really interesting. I'm not really sure where I sit on that issue, but I do think it opens it up to more people. And so if the goal is like net zero trauma or to help more people, I'm open to it. I don't think people, if they're available to the whole experience, I think that'll be the best. But at the same time, if you look at what the numbers are and the divorce rates and all of these different pieces, so we need to provide as much help to as many people as possible. And if that means sometimes people aren't going to get the psychedelic experience, well, hey, if it helps them and it clinically is proven and so forth, I'm kind of open for anything. It doesn't, and maybe my opinion will change. and as things develop, and then corporate interests and greed and so forth. But my interest in the space is just, I think, kind of like in the mindset question of, well, if you do it once, why do you keep doing it? Or these types of things is, I think we need to shift the way we look at just like pharmaceuticals and drugs and so forth, right? The idea is not to actually get well, it's to be like addicted to whatever they're giving you. And I think this empowers you to have that more kind of self-love. And so there's some really interesting companies that I've invested in. Probably was pretty junior in my experience, and like I wouldn't recommend like having money and then be like, hey, I'm going to read a bunch of articles and then get interested in it. But it has kept me abreast, and I think I'm more investing now in a place like investing in myself, my relationship. Also invested in really learning about the space so that I can be relatively knowledgeable. Not that I know exactly how I'm going to get in there based on my background, but almost investing my energy and time just by like reading and listening to people who are really interested in the space, like, Tim Ferriss, Sam Harris, following what Maps does, donating to them, just like staying abreast of what's kind of going on.
Why?
Yeah, it's a good question. Why? Because I was having a conversation earlier today where I would like to find work that has a purpose that's kind of bigger than me or what I'm exploiting or like taking, right? And in the corporate sales tech world, right? Like, hey, you meet great people. It's really interesting, the forefront of technology. But at the end of the day, it's all about like number one, which I think communities are built and people like thrive not by only thinking about their immediate needs, but actually like building teams and businesses and ideas that help others, right? And so for me, the reason why I stay abreast is just because it's an industry that I'm super excited about, super interested in, and I want to know enough to be able to like have conversations with people so that not that like they know that I'm interested, but kind of like, hey, I'm aware of what's going on, so that when the right timing or opportunity presents itself, like I know, and I think it's accumulation of like my career where you meet the right people, you put yourself in the right places. Yes, you work hard. Yes, you make good relationships. You have a good brand, all those things, but kind of like trusting the process. And I'll never forget the first, like a sales leader at LinkedIn said like, hey, the first third of your career is about learning, developing, creating a great network, working hard. Don't worry about the money, the title, and so forth. Second third is about, hey, what are you passionate about, right? You want to make money, you want to get a big title, you want to help people, like implementing kind of what you learned in the first third. And then the third, if you're lucky, you can be an investor, you can be a mentor, a coach, you kind of decide how you want to use your resources. And so for the longest time I've said I'm still in that first third. I think I'm probably on like the cusp of the second third. And so I think I've learned a lot. I think I've created a great network and people and interests. It's a matter of like bringing that whole piece to something I'm really passionate about that actually helps people beyond me. And just being in a place like Denver in June, right? Meeting with people, seeing what's going on, just like that feel, I believe and I hope is leading to the right thing, and also being patient, where in the past I'd be like, okay, I need it now. It's like, no, let's take some time and be patient. So I just think it's super interesting. And the last piece is what I kind of mentioned about Denver is the reason why I want to stay abreast of this news and what's going on in the space is it touches on so many different areas of where society could be helped. And if it's done properly, like I just think the benefits and the outsized influence it could have would just be so phenomenal if done right. And there's still a lot of way. It's still very nascent. And there's like only a couple thousand people who've been really through these trials of all these different compounds in a clinical setting. So kind of where can you get the biggest scale for the least amount of time and energy? And I still think there's just like so much to do within mental health that I've seen my experience, family members, friends, that somehow finding out where like a business, technology, leadership background can be helpful. It would really inspire me. So I want to keep it abreast, so I can have great conversations like this one with you and other people in the field.
Lovely. So I know this is a very annoying question because you're on a sabbatical where you're taking some time off to just enjoy life, travel, explore, build your relationship. So it's like, come on, give me a break, woman. Don't ask me about where I'm going next after that. I'm curious. Do you have already a direction or an idea what's happening after your time off?
It's a good question. I don't, and kind of that uncertainty I actually relish, in the sense that I have a feeling that there will be a time in the future where I know what's coming, right? You have your family, you have responsibilities, and that's appropriate. And so, I kind of live the motto, or at least I try to. Nobody's perfect at anything, but like if today or tomorrow was the last day I had, right? Like, did I do everything I kind of thought was right or wanted to or experienced? And it's not like just be voyeuristic and just do everything, but it's kind of like, hey, with the time you have you done the things you wanted to do and thought was appropriate, whether that's giving back or helping or experiencing and so forth. And for me, this period right now feels like, hey, there's gonna be some pretty big shifts in my life over the next couple of years, and taking this break and this pause is like, I mean, who knows, 10 days of Vipassana. I'm super excited physically, mentally, spiritually. Like, my girlfriend's done it, I think, 5 or 6 times, and I'm this anxious, I feel this like anxious little boy, probably like the little boy you saw when I came to you, who's just like, I'm ready, I'm so excited. But so I'm also just taking a pause and see, but I really would love to do something that is bigger than myself, and that helps the world, whether that's climate, whether that's psychedelics, whether that's, who knows, but I think that'll be really exciting. So I don't know what's next.
So Vipassana, and you mentioned before that your typical response to such intense, deep experiences is related to falling asleep. I had leaving the body. So for me, when I have deep breath work or Vipassana, I leave the body. It's something I'm still exploring why that happens. So I'm wondering how you're going to do 15 hours a day of sleep.
Well, sleeping, sitting upright. It's funny. I was talking to my physio, got some like wrist and other pain, and I was like, I'm trying to hack the Vipassana, right? That's where my mind goes. I'm going to stretch every day. I'm going to be there so fit. And he was just like, no, you're not going to be able to hack anything. Like, this is absolutely not, like, the experience is to go through the pain and the challenges. And so, I would really call it a calling, like with psychedelics, where I've been wanting to just be silent for 10 days, and I couldn't justify it when I was working, because I was like, do I really want to take 10 days off to sit and do nothing, which means I probably really should do that. But I didn't, and now I have the opportunity. So I'm super curious to see what happens. But also there's like anxious, nervous little child that's like, oh, what's going to come? So I'll report back to you afterwards.
I cannot wait. I'm so curious. And I want to make a prediction before we close with the question that you leave for the guest that's coming. And that prediction is, they say, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. I want to paraphrase that, and I want to say, tell me what your interests are and I'll tell you who you are.
Yeah.
Now you're exploring stuff with like, okay, I'm going to relax and let things come to me. I kind of see a convergence when you return back. Convergence of tech, digital, psychedelics, and all of that together in one person. And I also have a little bit of a reference from our first session together where you were singing Shamanic Icarus, which I think is quite telling about the direction you're headed towards. So very interesting. So Michael, super nice to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and especially with all this excitement happening around you. I think this has been a very interesting conversation for many, many reasons, and because you're so relatable for the public who's listening, and because you're so interesting, and because you're so inspiring. So I love having you here, and I hope that you have a nice question for the person who is going to be interviewed next.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me here, and this is my first time here, just like the first time we sat down for that psilocybin journey in December of 2020. So thank you for your friendship and including me, and just it's really, really exciting. So I really appreciate it and appreciate our relationship, and that you get to meet my girlfriend soon and spend time with Steve. So all very exciting stuff. So I was thinking about the question, right? And it's not going to be as technical or difficult, but it came up in a conversation I had last night at dinner. I think it's really, I don't listen to a lot of news, or I don't pay attention to. During COVID, I was like, every day I would listen to the New York Times, stay abreast of everything. And then I realized kind of like, what is the intention behind that? And if I'm listening to all the news of the things, and hey, I think there's certainly important pieces to understand and stay slightly abreast. But when you spend so much time exposing to it, then that's what your conversations have. And then like, how am I going to change politics or this or that? Like, if I wanted to, I could go there and try to change and be, but that's not the calling I have at the moment. So I'd rather focus on meditation or mindfulness or this topic that we're talking about, because I have direct experience and I can inspire or discuss it with others. And so, the conversation last night at dinner, we talked a little about this, and my question, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Maybe you can help me decide how to phrase it exactly. But, when two different people, right, have like diametrically opposite views of a situation, and this can be political. I mean, hey, there's a situation going on right now, right? And not making any opinions about it whatsoever. And, there's a obviously situation going on in EU with Ukraine and Russia, and like all of these issues, right? And then when you have two people, and one thing Sam Harris talks about is like the biggest challenge is that we don't have conversations. And so what I think I would leave the next guest with, it doesn't have to be specific about any current political or situation or military or conflicts going on, is what is the best way to get two people who have completely different views on the topic to have a respectful, thoughtful, important conversation where they don't have necessarily the goal of having to convince each other, but at least giving themselves the space, co-creating the space together to be able to, over the coming days and weeks, think about that conversation, rather than what I typically see or hear about is people like digging in their heels, and no matter what occurs, people are just like completely lost the plot. And it's like, here's my position, and if I don't remove, it's so tied to my ego. So the question, long story short, is like, how do you get two people on completely different sides to have a respectful conversation together? What do you do, and what would be the goals of after that conversation?
I am so tempted to go into the topic of the peacekeeping, where they put the experiment in 2022, where they put people together from Israel and Palestine, and they try to see if they're going to find a way to heal their ancestral differences together and remove the heels from the sand, like you're saying. But we're not going to go into that. Thank you very much for that question. We'll keep it for our guests and for our viewers or listeners. Yeah, what are your modalities? What is your go-to technology for feeling better, for personal development, for falling in love with yourself? Please leave a comment in the comment section for if you're on Spotify. And hope you're having a wonderful week.